All right. Okay, my camera doesn't want to focus. There we go. We are live. Welcome in, everybody. It is, January 22nd, 2025. And welcome in. This is episode number 31 of the Calibrated live show with your host, the one, the only, the always here, always present, but never really around, Scott, me, myself, and I. I appreciate you all being in here tonight. I am just going to retweet my live stream real fast and we will get started. I hope everybody had an amazing weekend into your week. Been a little bit, right? I think Friday was the last episode. Live now. Bye-bye. All right. All right. How's everybody doing? Queens, New York, Pakistan. I saw somebody said Oklahoma Sooner, Jimmy for life, go Chiefs. Yes, go Chiefs. Hopefully they win this next week. Got anyone but the Chiefs with their ref buddies. Oh, man, have you ever heard a loser talk louder in their entire life? Blaming the refs? You sound like every Patriot hater ever. Queens, New York. Good to see you. Calibration, good to see you, my friend. Boston, Massachusetts. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Greetings from Brazil. Melbourne, Australia, Kenya. What about them Washington football teams, the Commanders? They got a young Mahomes in quarterback. So it's going to be exciting to see how they improve and perform. Alabama, nice. Reno, Nevada. Well, I'm glad that there are so many Ameribros in here. I still call them the Redskins. That's fine. I was just making a joke. It's 2025. All right, they're the Commanders now. Ohio. Welcome in, everybody. We have quite a bit to talk about today. We had Trump's inauguration. We're going to cover some of that, some of the executive orders that he put through, what they mean for Ukraine, for the world altogether, sort of the direction it seems like the Trump administration might be going, what he's actually going to be able to accomplish with regards to Ukraine and the Ukrainian conflict. There's a lot of noise going back and forth right now. It's kind of hard to understand everything that's going on, even for somebody like myself. So we will talk about that. We will discuss that. And we will go over the map updates. Particularly, the Ukrainians are currently losing the cities of Toretsk, Chasiv Yar, and Velyka Novosilka, with Pokrovsk being very quickly surrounded and cut off. So we will also talk about that in today's map updates. We have a ton of map updates. I would appreciate if everybody could subscribe. If you are not already subscribed, click that like button. I imagine most of you in here watching this live are subscribed, are following me in different areas. But if you are not, you can find the links to all of my social media outlets where I post news and updates in the description of this video. Thank you guys so much. I have taken my Patreon down. I haven't been uploading on my Patreon. I'm still trying to find some sort of formula that works there for me. I just completely lost all drive to post those combat footage videos. I just got tired of it. So I'm working on something. If you guys have ideas, DM me, let me know. And if you have questions, you can always ask questions just in chat. I might get to them. But if you have a question you want answered, or you would just like to support my show and my work, you can do that through super chats. I answer every single super chat that gets asked. So thank you guys so much. Let's go ahead and get into this. All right. I'm going to open that up too. Okay. All right. So we will start up in the north. Let me make sure that I am teeny tiny so you guys can see everything. All right. So no major updates in the Kursk area or the Kharkov region. Still cannot believe that this is open. Ukrainians are still just getting battered in here. They are trying to continuously hold this area. Lots of losses for the Ukrainians and not really achieving much. I think that they're just trying to hold on to this until negotiations. Maybe we're going to talk about that in a little bit. All right. All right, moving over to the bridgehead across the Oskol River here to the north of Kupiansk. You can see that the Russians have now very much so crossed the river. This was an unconfirmed advance in purple last time. It has been updated to green. So the green area is now Russian controlled and not just unconfirmed Russian control. It is now confirmed. That connects and makes this bridgehead much, much larger. It is now a very stable bridgehead that the Russians are enjoying at least some relative peace back here, with the front line being pushed back to across the R-79 highway to this string of villages where the next Ukrainian defense line is located. We can see here that Zapadne has been captured by Russian forces, as well as the remaining area of Debrivka. They have not completely captured Dvorishane right here, which is what the name of this greater urban settlement, but there are multiple small villages in that settlement. So, okay. Moving down to the bridgehead across the Zhibyets River here next to Bila Horivka, Yampolivka, Liman is the general area. This is the Liman front. And you can see that the Russians have advanced down from south from Ivanivka towards Bila Horivka and have advanced towards Nove out here. Just greatly expanding this bridgehead, making it much more stable. And now the Russians should be able to push out, close this pocket down here, Yampolivka, potentially push into Toretsk, and then really begin to put pressure on Liman and the Shibyansky forestry here, which will then compromise the Seversk salient. So the Russians are moving now very aggressively in a couple of areas where, previously we hadn't seen a significant amount of movement. One area, and both of these being bridgeheads. So also think about the additional challenges of crossing a body of water and keeping this supplied. The Russians are now advancing north of Kupiansk, which is going to completely compromise the defense of the city along the Oskil River. This is what I had referred to earlier, a couple months earlier, where I said the Ukrainians have a few areas across the map where they potentially could retreat, set up very strong defensive lines, and then hold the Russians for a much longer time at those strong defensive lines. And one of those areas was the Oskil River region. However, the Ukrainians chose to hold areas like Peshane here and this salient, as well as, everything south of this breakthrough that happened occurred in this area. This now compromises all of that because the Ukrainians never set up those defense lines across the river. Instead, the Russians were able to cross while the Ukrainians were distracted down here, and now they will lose both. Right? So they sacrificed both of these areas basically for the propaganda of holding this side of the river. It doesn't make much sense to me. I was talking about it for months and months and months, and now we're seeing the Russians just capitalizing on the lack of forward thinking from the Ukrainians, in my personal opinion. And then the second bridgehead, obviously being down here in Yampolivka, working towards Liman. We haven't seen any movement in this area for quite some time, and this is significant. This is what you would refer to, at least in this front, as somewhat of a breakthrough. And we could see a lot of this area to the north compromised because of Russian advances in this area. All right. Just something to note. I'm going to actually take us over to my Twitter page where I'm going to show you guys some North Korean weapons that are being given to the Russian military, purchased, whatever, traded. I don't know how the situation goes, but here you can see these very large 170 millimeter artillery pieces, self-propelled artillery pieces that the Ukrainian or the North Koreans have given to the Russians. And the reason why I bring this up is they've been given, according to open source intelligence, anywhere between 24 and 36 of these large self-propelled guns. And these are now being used. I'm going to head back over to the map. In this Liman area very heavily, and as the Ukrainians put it, they're not reserving ammunition in this new 170 millimeter gun. I don't know if the North Koreans just had a bunch of this 170 millimeter to give to the Russians, but the Russians are firing this aggressively. They're using it for heavy fire support and saturation of Ukrainian positions in and around Liman. So could potentially be why we're seeing the progress here too, is additional firepower being brought to this area. All right. We all good over here in chats? All right, boys. All right, we good. We good. All right, moving to Chasiv Yar. I have got rid of the encirclement in this area. We did not get confirmation of a complete encirclement, so I'm just going to leave it open. I do think that the Ukrainians in this area are partially trapped. The Russians do have captured this set of high-rise buildings, and this was the update we got, which had said that the Russians had moved along Dniprovska Street, so this street, but I guess that they meant more over here, maybe potentially not over here. We don't know that the Russians don't have control of this area. It's just what we have so far on the map. So I sort of rolled that back just because I didn't want to give a false impression that there was a Ukrainian encirclement here. And the Russians have now moved into these high-rise buildings right here next to the stadium. Additionally, the northern suburb of Chasiv Yar has been entirely pushed out by the Russians now. Chasiv Yar is close to wrapping up here. After this section is captured, all of Chasiv Yar will be captured, depending on how they claim this area right here. If this is part of Mykolaiv, then all of Chasiv Yar will have been captured. All right. Kreminski. We can see that in Toretsk, the Russian forces have entered into this industrial facility right here, this mine, as well as the last remaining little suburban area. And over here, we can see that the Russian forces have captured one of the last remaining heights that really watches all of this area and the roads that come into Toretsk. So for all intensive purposes now, the Battle of Toretsk is over. It's more the battle for the outlying smaller cities or towns. I don't know, Shabivka over here and Novospassky in this area over here. This will continue for a while. But in terms of the battle for Toretsk, the city is almost completely captured now by the Russians. All right, now moving over to the Pokrovsk front. Just to the south of Pokrovsk, Russian forces have just advanced into the southern end of Lysivka here. The northern end is still under Ukrainian control and protected by this trench fortification line right here, as well as further trench fortifications closer to the city. This area right here is going to be very difficult for the Russians to move through. I don't expect a ton of advance here. And then all at once, I expect this line to break and the Russians are just going to be in Pokrovsk. More than likely, they're going to enter from this end over here. But right now, the focus still seems to be the encirclement and the suffocation or starvation of the garrison in this area, with control over the E50 and potentially this highway road to the north here eventually. So in terms of the actual updates we have, right outside of Kotelin, where there is a mine facility, Russian forces have again advanced. This is important because it's just in the direction of the E50. As soon as the Russians are able to cut this physically, it's going to really put this entire area into a very, very difficult position. And that's when you should start to see the Russian assaults in this area. So this is kind of the go time, the E50 being cut. Once that happens, then Pokrovsk and Minhorod, the battle for the city, should actually probably start in earnest. All right, in Udachny, we have a small Russian advance, capturing about half of the village, a third of the village, and the Russians are now 3.2 miles, so roughly 5 to 6 kilometers from the Dnipropetrovsk region. So closing in very quickly. Just to the south, Russian forces have captured all of Uspennivka, which is again advancing towards Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. To the south, Russian forces have advanced into Nadivka here. It's just small advances. Russian forces have captured Novoandrivka, as well as advanced to the south here and into what I would consider the southern end of Serbini, right here, which is actually kind of a double town with Zaporozhye, the village. So Russians, again, moving in the direction of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Just to the west of Slavyanka, Russian forces have made a small advance through this field right here. Again, just putting pressure on Andrivka and this fortification to the north of it. Once this falls, Andrivka should fall in short order, as well as Constantinople. Just a small map adjustment here, not really much of an advance. The Russians just controlled this tree line on the opposite side of the river now in this pocket. All right, now getting down to the final area of discussion here. As we're looking at this map, I mean, I know I talked about this in my last episode, but it was developing at that time. We had just gotten an update that the Russians had advanced through Velyka here, which actually physically cuts the Ukrainians from retreat. You can see that there is a water boundary here that the Ukrainians would have to cross in order to make it back to their lines. It's not impossible. It's probably like a 15 meter across river in most areas, probably 6 to 8 feet deep at the deepest part. So not like a major task to cross it, but when you have Russians in this area, reconnaissance drones flying over it all the time, FPVs going back and forth. I mean, the distance is only, even if we go deep into the territory, 5 miles. So very, very possible for FPV drones to be completely running a route basically over this entire position while the Ukrainians are attempting to retreat from Velyka Novosilka. I have some Ukrainian sources that I'm going to mention here in a second. I'm going to talk about some of the units in this area and what's been going on for them. But I'm just going to tell you that this is an absolute train wreck. The Ukrainians just are at a point where I think if they really actually start retreating now, they don't have the human capital to reestablish themselves quicker than the Russians will reach them. So, in terms of an orderly retreat from an area like Velyka Novosilka, I just don't think it's really possible. And this comes from my reading of Ukrainian sources talking about the situation in the city, talking about the 110th Brigade, which has been here for quite some time, and looking at the geography and the map. There is absolutely no way to easily infiltrate or exfil out of Velyka Novosilka for the Ukrainians now. This map is not even representative of how tight it is in the city. The Russians have advanced into the southern part of the city here and more into the western part right here. However, I'm just going to leave it all like this until the whole thing falls, which should happen in the next couple of days. The situation is so untenable that there's just a route. I mean, we had reports that Ukrainian forces were trying to push through Velyka here because it's one of the only ways to get out back to Ukrainian lines, and that's through Russian-controlled areas. Russian-controlled. It's not like they have a wall of men there and nobody can get through, but you're going through what would be considered enemy territory while retreating on foot, and you have to cross a river in the middle of winter. So, not really a great setup from the AFU High Command. I don't know what exactly they're long-term goal was here. But now you have another massive embarrassment that just doesn't get talked about. You know, the Ukrainian information space doesn't even talk about the map anymore. It's pretty abysmal. You know, the Ukrainians have been trying to like break through in some of these areas, trying to attack from the north, but there's just no human resources here to fight anymore. Actually, interestingly enough, I'm seeing reports that the Ukrainians are saying they have enough FPV drones. They actually have a decent amount of artillery. They're not starving for artillery like they were in 2023 and so on. But now the problem is they just don't have humans. They just don't have people. They can't fill trenches. They can't hold this massive front line. And that's why we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about here in a little bit with Zelensky's speeches and talks at Davos at the World Economic Forum. So yeah, this is the end of my updates today, guys. Again, just this is just kind of going exactly how I expected it to. And I'll just put this up again. I know I bring this up a lot, but you can see how the Russians are continuing to advance in exactly the path that I had expected them to. And out here, you can see this yellow line is when I created this prediction. The Russians are moving almost perfectly within this, just because it follows the geography. So this prediction is coming out very handsomely. And then as soon as Andrivka falls, this green line will be almost perfect to where the Ukrainians will have to fall back to before retreating behind the yellow arc right there. So pretty cool. Pretty cool to see it all coming together over a couple of months. All right. All right, guys. That is it for the map today. Thank you so much. Okay. Hopefully everybody's doing good. Hopefully everybody is doing good. Thank you, Mr. Boston. All right, I wanted to just show you guys this because this comes from a Ukrainian source talking about the situation in Velyka Novosilka. So I'm just going to read this to you guys real quick. To share screen. All right. So Ukraine's 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade, commenting on the situation near Velyka Novosilka in the Donetsk Oblast, have emphasized that despite having sufficient artillery and drones, the unit is facing a critical shortage of personnel in the infantry divisions. 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade, quote, compared to Avdiivka, the reasons for losing the territory are different. In Avdiivka, there was a shortage of artillery rounds and FPV drones. We were just starting to develop, but infantry was still present back then. The absence of artillery was made up for by the troops. Meat in trenches, basically, is what they're talking about here. Now, however, there is enough artillery and drones, but there are not enough soldiers to fight. This is a complete shortage of personnel in infantry units. Details. The soldiers said that a typical Russian assault operation involves several groups of 4 to 6 individuals attacking Ukrainian positions from different directions. The most intense activity occurs at dawn when reduced visibility due to fog or rain makes aerial reconnaissance much more challenging. The Russians frequently move through wooded areas using the vegetation to shield themselves from FPV drones. Quote, hitting a moving target with artillery is extremely difficult, and in such cases, cluster munitions are somewhat effective. Targeting FPV drones in a grove is challenging due to the radio horizon and the branches that obstruct accurate hits. Moreover, enemy groups now often include soldiers with automatic shotguns, and they are able to shoot down our drones. So this is just the kind of the back and forth, ebb and flow of battle, right? Defensive measures always combating offensive measures. It's an arms race on the ground. But the important aspect of this, and this is a quote from this brigade, is that they don't have the human capital to hold the lines. They actually have the artillery resources. They actually have the FPV drones, but they just don't have the human capital to fight. And that is a major problem because that is something that the West cannot provide. This is what Zelensky is asking for, but it's just not going to happen. And if it does happen, we're in a much worse situation, and I'll probably stop doing this, and we'll have other things going on in our lives, so we won't have to worry about that. But yeah, that's just what I wanted to show you from there on Velyka Novosilka. Now I wanted to talk about Trump, so we'll move into Trump. All right, guys. Most of this is just my opinion and just my thoughts on what he's doing and how this is going to go forward. So, Donald Trump came into office. He was inaugurated as the president of the United States, and he started off with a massive list of executive orders, a bunch of which undoing executive orders that Biden had put into place. But some of them were for other things, particularly one that was in the news and one that I incorrectly reported on was that Ukraine aid and all foreign aid would be stopped for 90 days. This, it turns out to be a half-truth. It's some of the development projects or something like that, the reconstruction and stuff like that. That development is being, or that aid is being looked at and will be inspected, surveyed, I don't know, whatever word you want to use, over the next 90 days. So, automatically excluded was the Jewish Crescent. So Jordan, Egypt, and Israel. They were always going to get weapons, obviously. But it does appear as though the Ukrainians will be receiving weapons. So nothing has changed significantly. I never expected anything to change. I had my hopes that, something might shift, but I don't really think Trump has many options. And I think that he's kind of, they effectively trapped him with this. Not that it's trapped as in he doesn't have a way to not make it his problem now. And so if it's his problem, he has to deal with it. And the way he's probably going to go about that is almost in the same way Biden went about it, except probably a little bit more strength in his position and probably much more communication with Russia in terms of trying to actually get a negotiated settlement. We will see. I don't think it's going to happen. Like I've said the entire time, Europe's position, Ukraine's position, Russia's position, and the US's position are all separate matters, right? These things are not connected. They are not talked about, discussed. So these positions are so far removed from each other. And I'm going to talk about what Zelensky was saying today. But first and foremost, let's go ahead and read this. I'm not looking to hurt Russia. I love the Russian people. All right, good start. You know what? This is better than the entire Biden administration. It's not the basic Russians' fault. He's not trying to hurt Russia. He's trying to stop the war in Ukraine. At least this is a respectable position that maybe the most liberal Russian population could understand at this point, right? Hey, Trump isn't talking about how the Russians are the problem. It's more the war. It's not Putin even. It's just the war happening needs to stop. And always had a very good relationship with President Putin. And this, despite the radical left's Russia hoax, which is true. I mean, we have not heard the end of Russiagate and, blaming Russia for everything that happens. It doesn't end. So that is, again, a real thing. We must never forget that Russia helped us win the Second World War, losing almost 60 million lives in the process. That's not true. Don't know who gave him that number. The Russians lost, I think, 11 million soldiers and 17 million civilians. So somewhere around 27 million Soviet civilians or Soviet casualties throughout World War II. Not quite 60 million, but hey, given, we're just exaggerating everything here. So all of that being said, I'm going to do Russia, whose economy is failing. We're going to talk about that too in a second. And President Putin, a very big favor. Settle now and stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse. If we don't make a deal, and soon, I have no other choice but to put high-level taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on everything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries. Let's get this war, which never would have started if I were president, probably true, over with. We can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way, and the easy way is always better. It's time to make a deal. No more lives should be lost. Hey, at least that is an acceptable position to get behind, right? It's not 1991 borders. It's not Russia must leave. This is actually attempting to find middle ground, and I I understand this is like what I had hoped from the Biden administration for years and years that they were going to do, but they wanted the war. They wanted the war to continue. It's very clear. They also wanted Gaza to continue. It is very clear that the second Trump came in, we're already getting talks about how Ukraine is in a very bad position and they need to negotiate. The situation in Gaza has settled, at least temporarily. And I really do think that has a lot to do with Trump coming into office. Now, we come to the part that doesn't make any sense. First and foremost, in Trump's recent speeches, he's been using estimates that come directly from the Ukrainian MOD. Basically, everything that he's saying is the same. It's like highly uneducated rhetoric when it comes to this subject. It's all, I don't know who's giving him this information, but he is just as debased from reality as almost all the other political leadership I've seen talk about Ukraine. They have no idea what's actually going on the ground. I don't know if it's just a narrative that they have to push, sort of a script that they have to stay on. But the way he's talking about it, it sounds like Zelensky just talking about the war and how it's proceeding with an American twist. And that is very concerning because I don't think President Trump or most of the political class of the United States has a very solid idea of what's going on in Ukraine. Now, do we expect everybody to know what's going on in Ukraine as well as the autistic kid who maps it all day and does YouTube live streams about it? Absolutely not. But the fact that he has access to some of the best intelligence in the world in terms of their abilities to gather intelligence, not exactly present it properly, is very concerning to me. That makes me think that he's going to make missteps based on information being fed to him by bad intelligence sources. I don't know. And then let's get to the leverage aspect of this. So basically he's saying settle now, which makes sense for Kiev. Now is the time when they need to settle. Nothing is getting better. It's only going to get worse from this point on. And now is the time to settle. They should have tried to settle before the Russians invaded. They should have tried to settle in Istanbul in April. They should have settled after Kherson and Kharkov. And now, we're looking at this, and what strength do the Ukrainians have? They have none. There's no strength present in negotiations. Zelensky at Davos was just asking for 200,000 NATO troops to be deployed into Ukraine on the front line to enforce a ceasefire as basically a tripwire, direct intervention into this conflict. I don't see that happening ever. That's a ridiculous proposition. But it kind of shows the mindset that Zelensky's in. He's not talking about negotiations. In fact, a Bloomberg article that was posted today talks about how Zelensky said basically the starting position is that the Russians need to leave the country to start negotiations, which I don't know how much of this is theater, how much of this is narrative, how much of this he has to say. And then behind closed doors, there might be dealings and other stuff going on. But to me, it's just completely debased from reality. And again, emphasizes the critical position that Trump and the United States are in when it comes to whether they want to continue support for Ukraine or retract support from Ukraine. And that is, will Zelensky even negotiate if he's brought to the table? In fact, most of the Russian side and quite a bit of the American side is saying that if you want peace, you have to completely ignore Europe and Ukraine, which is mind-boggling to me to think that you can ignore the two countries besides Russia. I mean, the two regions, Ukraine, a country, and the EU, a region, a continent, whatever you want to call it, an alliance, that are more directly impacted by the Ukraine conflict, but you just negate them because they're so like I said, debased from reality, that you can't ever achieve any negotiable position. And so it just appears like we're going to be seeing the exact same continuation. Potentially, we'll see what Trump does. He tends to be a loose cannon politically. If he can't get something done, he may escalate. However, I'm seeing that as a much less likely option, because at some point somebody has to come to him and say, even if we give the Ukrainians F-35s and all of our ATACMs and all of our Storm Shadows and Tauruses and all the tanks, they don't have the human capital to continue fighting, to put people in those vehicles, to train people on those instruments and stuff like that. So I don't see a really solid way out for Trump here. And I think he's just going to be stuck with this, just like the Biden administration intended. And I believe that he will begin funding Ukraine in the exact same way the Biden administration did, until this whole thing comes to an end, basically on Russian terms. Because if the Russians can't get what they need as their minimums, they're not going to negotiate. And it doesn't appear as though Zelensky's even close to being ready to agree to any of those positions. And so, that's what we're dealing with. And this is why you have to be careful about how important and prominent and powerful you make a proxy puppet figure in their country, because then you have a situation where you've created this hero, and if you tear him down and remove him, it detracts from your entire narrative and what you're going for in the conflict. Another big mistake, saying that we're all in on Ukraine as long as it takes, stuff like this is very bad language politically. All right, let me go over here. Let me stop sharing real fast and let me see if I can find it. So basically, Zelensky's solution to all of this seems to be a massive amount of NATO peacekeepers coming into the country. Again, not a non-starter for Russia. It would be a much wider war if that was the case. They're not going to allow that. It's not going to happen. Ukraine is still talking about NATO membership. Again, a non-starter for Russia. And it appears that NATO in the West is pretty much a non-starter on that itself. So I don't think we're going to see any of that. And really, guys, like I said, the president doesn't change much. Foreign policy does not change with the president. There is a permanent establishment in the United States who are going to be making decisions constantly. Some policy shifts do occur, but overall, the general direction that the United States is going is kind of immovable, I would say. It can be changed, but it's incredibly difficult, and the likelihood of it changing without a catastrophic catalyst. Okay. We have one question here. Sorry, I missed it. The politically astute decision for Trump is to wash his hands of Ukraine and leave the blame with Biden. Otherwise, the loss will define his legacy. You can say that, but if the Russian position in Europe is increased, if the sphere of influence and their ability to dictate into Europe, I mean, say they take all of Ukraine and then they reestablish relations with Europe. Now you have a much more powerful, strong, militarily speaking Russia, an independent economic Russia, supplying all of this energy to China, India, Europe. I mean, it's going to put them on the fast track to being a powerhouse in the region, and that's just not what the U.S. wants. So you can say wash your hands and rid yourself of it, but then in 4 years, if you're looking back on a Russia that's now dominating parts of Eastern Europe and their politics and stuff, because of how successful the Ukraine operation ended for them in terms of what they got out of it, how it all wrapped up, then you're looking at a failed Trump presidency, where not only are you dealing with, the shift to the Pacific, where most of your attention is wanting to be on China. Now you have built up this incredibly powerful Russia in Europe. You've weakened your European allies, and you are now splitting your attention between two major rivals that are allied with each other. So it's just a very difficult position to be in. I don't think ending support for Ukraine, as much as I think personally ending support for Ukraine is a good thing, I don't think geostrategically for the United States it's something beneficial, and I don't think that anybody's going to go through with that. How long till the Russians reach the Dnieper River, and then what do you think will happen? I have no idea, brother. They could stop at the Donetsk Oblast and not even enter the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. I don't know. But at the current rate, I would say that is something we could be looking at in potentially a year. It really depends on how U.S. support is shifted, adjusted, increased, decreased. Depends on a number of things. If the Ukrainian armed forces draft men age 18 through 25 and get them into the trenches immediately, that could buy Ukraine a couple months, a year, potentially. I mean, they'd still be losing territory, but it wouldn't be anything dramatic, and probably more accelerated than we're seeing currently, but not like the Russians are just breaking through and driving wherever they want and capturing all this territory, this, that, and the other. So I would not put a date on it because it's just too hard to know. But I think for that sort of position, you might be looking at a year and a half. I've always said that the conflict is probably going to end in 2026 if it doesn't end through a negotiated settlement. Thank you for your question. If Europe deported all the Ukrainians, would it somehow help the manpower? I mean, you're deporting. So here's the problem about getting people who have already run away, pulling them back, and then throwing them into war. It's not a winning recipe, right? So yeah, you might get a couple 100,000 people back from Europe, and maybe 100,000 of them are men. And I mean, it's going to be hard, first off, to even get those people to go back, especially with the laws in Europe and with regards to refugee status and stuff like that. Sending people back into war zones is really a bad look. And I think if it was going to be done, it probably already would have been done. So I don't think that's really an option. And even if it was an option, I don't think it would be overly beneficial. If Ukraine or Europe matters in negotiations with Russia, please tell us why. I said they don't. If you are contradicting yourself, if Ukraine is so weak as you say, then how does Ukraine position on negotiations matter? Because they will continue fighting. They have the option to continue the war, right? They have to agree to stop fighting. So Ukraine still has a position in the negotiations. What I'm saying is, if you want the negotiations to be successful, you do not include Ukraine in said negotiations. I'm not contradicting myself. Ukraine is weaker than they previously were. They are getting weaker day by day, week by week, and their negotiating position is getting worse. They can still come to the table and negotiate, but the current regime is choosing not to. I hope that makes sense. You know me. Let's see. The Plantier. Trump's whole movement was a revolt against the globalist neocons. Wouldn't him taking the off-ramp on Ukraine send a strong signal to his MAGA base? Yeah, again, this is fine. But you still have things like the US economy that you want to keep running, right? You still have things like the military industrial complex that is lobbying and making a bunch of people a bunch of money. That's never going to end. These things never go away. Trump is not some hero. I know that the very pro-Trump people might want him to be, or maybe some people have this idea that he's really going to change things, and he might do some things differently. And I think that for the overall health of the United States, Trump is the right choice. I think that he's going to make things generally better, especially in the conditions that we are globally. However, he just doesn't have the magic wand that he can wave over everything to fix everything and make everybody happy and go back to their own corners and live their own peaceful lives. That's just it's kind of it's like utopian style thinking. It's the you're wishing for the best, and it's just probably not going to happen. Yeah. But I like I said, I think that he should take the off ramp. I think if he stopped support for Ukraine, Russia would stop. That this is part of it. I think that if the support stopped and everybody understood that this thing was actually over, then Zelensky would have to come to the table and negotiate. Right? That doesn't necessarily mean you stop the aid if Putin keeps going or something like that. But if you can get it to stop by threatening the side that refuses to negotiate, which is Kiev, then you might solve the issue. So, but I don't think we're going to see that. I think Trump is going to basically what I think Trump is doing is setting up a situation where it's going to look like he's trying to achieve peace, and he's going to put out as much as he can, and then when it doesn't end up working out, because it can't end up working out, he can then say, okay, well, now Putin doesn't want to negotiate, so now I'm going to go the opposite direction and start really arming Ukraine. But I don't think it will really matter, and I think it'll make the end result much worse in terms of the outlook for the U.S. Good question, though. Will Trump's base turn on him if he pivots 180 and starts sending more weapons to Ukraine? No, they're dumb. The American population is dumber than a bag of rocks, dude. I don't know, guys. This is if you can rile people up and you can make them upset or believe something, they will believe anything, right? If you just get them into that mindset, and they're in a fervor mindset right now. If Trump says Putin isn't doing what he's supposed to be doing, and now I have to protect the Ukrainians, a flip is going to switch. The only reason the MAGA people didn't really like it is because it was the Biden administration pushing it, right? This is sort of a reason. I mean, there is this sort of non-interventionalist, but I think that most of those people can be convinced of interventionalism if it is deemed proper in their brain. And I think that if you are a hardcore MAGA individual and Trump's narrative switches up quick, your narrative will switch with it. Is there a reason they didn't use the Orshnik again? Because there's no point. They demonstrated that they can hit a specific target with advanced warning, and that the Ukrainians or the United States would not be able to stop it, basically. They demonstrated the weapon's effectiveness and what it could do. Now, if you fire another one, you're just wasting them. I mean, they're meant to carry nukes. So, I mean, they can carry high explosive, but it's a medium range ballistic missile that's intended to dissolve basically the INF treaty. Calibrated. How are the current strengths of both sides, tanks and APC numbers? Whenever I see a decline in videos showing armored attacks, I'm not sure that's because of drones or lack of equipment. It's a bunch of different things. The Russians are beginning to run out of endless equipment, which is something that you have to expect, right? They're in their third year of war. It's hard to produce as much armor that is needed in this high attrition battle, right? You're fighting against FPV drones that are $500 and everywhere. And basically it's getting to the point where it's almost like civilian cars that can move quick and don't ignite and explode are the more preferred vehicles now by the troops on the ground on both sides, because like the BMPs and stuff like that, when they get hit by those RPG rounds, it's hard to get out of them, and you die inside. But what it looks like to me is like one corner of a car will get hit, and then the rest of the passengers might have shrapnel wounds, but they're decently okay. So I think that there's a number of reasons you see dips and rises in armor availability is obviously one. Situationally, the circumstances in a situation can change, where motorcycles might be the preferred choice over tanks or BMPs and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's just, you're in the third year of a very intense war. and you're going to begin to see that lack of armor becoming present, and it's on both sides very clearly. I mean, the Ukrainians have been struggling with armor reserves for like over a year now, basically. So CIA plants are donating to Scott. Imagine if the CIA had to like donate to me through that, and it was that's how they're like funneling money to me. Do you think Russia will annex more Ukrainian regions? I do believe so. I believe that they will at least annex Kharkov and probably Dnipropetrovsk, at least. When somebody punches a hole in your argument, you twist what you say. Second time you've done this. No, not really. I've basically said the same thing the entire time. I think that you're mad that your point is kind of getting picked apart. No, Ukraine is weakening. They're becoming weaker. They have a worsening negotiation point if they chose to negotiate. The West is putting pressure on them to negotiate. Russia wants to negotiate. And the U.S. is basically saying, if you don't negotiate, we may pull funding. That's what Trump could. I think that's what Trump is potentially saying to Zelensky, and we'll see how he goes forward with it. I'm not changing anything. Why would I have to change anything? I like it how you're so angry too that you have to put emojis and everything in caps. Scott, how much longer can Ukraine go? Give me an estimate. Like I said, a year and a half is like what I would think is max in terms of their ability to keep manpower in the trenches. Remember, the Russian army is growing. The Ukrainian army, or the Ukrainian government, has just said that the Russian army is now at like 1.2 million in and around Ukraine. So that's a huge force concentration, and we're not seeing that being utilized fully. So, they're going to be able to keep this pace, probably an ever increasing pace, for a very long time. Question. Will there ever be a U.S. president that will not listen to AIPAC? No, guys, AIPAC, you have to remember that AIPAC is just another extension of the U.S., right? Israel is literally the 51st state. It is a forward operating base for the U.S. in the Middle East. We will never let Israel down. We will never let them go. And like I've said, if Israel falls, we as Americans and we as people of the free loving world will have much, much bigger issues on our hands. So no, I don't think any politician will ever stop listening to AIPAC unless Israel starts doing things that are just completely out of sync with what the U.S. wants. But then I think we'll just put pressure on their government and switch their government like we can do. So will Trump's base turn on him if you already answered that one. Already answered that one. Already answered that one. You said negotiations can't happen because U.S., Europe, and Ukraine's positions are wide apart. Then in the next sentence, you say Ukraine's position doesn't matter. No, that's not what I'm saying. See, you're not listening. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is people on the Russian and U.S. side of the negotiations of the higher political class have both said that if you want a peace agreement to work, you have to exclude Ukraine. I'm not saying that Ukraine has to be excluded or their position doesn't matter. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's interesting that you have both sides saying that Ukraine's position doesn't matter when Ukraine and Europe are the most affected by this decision. See, you have to listen. If you don't listen, this is why you get mad and type in caps and not understand what's going on, because you're not listening. You're just thinking, and then a second I say something that you disagree with that conflicts with your bias, you would jump on it and you start typing. Just stop typing and listen, okay? It's easy, boys. It's easy. I think that he's going to try to get stuff done, and I'm going to be a Trumper after this if he can get this done, because I will be amazed to see him both get a ceasefire in Gaza and in Ukraine in the first 100 days. That would be unbelievable, and I'd be very interested to see how that works out. Do you think Trump 2.0 will be blamed for Ukraine? By the Democrats, definitely. By any reasonable person that has brain cells and can think past their nose, no. Do you think Russia may be tempted to make a deal if complete sanction relief is offered? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that would be a huge win for the Russians, because if we look at Russia's GDP too, this does have to do a little bit with currency inflation, but let's see here. Right here. You can see that Russia's budget revenue rose to a record high last month, even after the U.S. targeted the banking sector with a new round of sanctions aimed at disrupting foreign trade payments and curbing proceeds from exports. Total revenue in December reached more than 4 trillion rubles, $40 billion, up by 28% compared with the same month of the previous year. According to Bloomberg, the calculations based on finance ministry data published late Tuesday. That's the highest level of recorded in ministry data that starts from January 2011. So yeah, the Russian economy is running hot, but it is not in a terrible position. And personally, I don't think that sanctions relief is the way to go forward. But I'm not an economic specialist. I'm not sitting in the debriefings in Russia, in Moscow, listening to how the economy could be on that brink of collapse. I just don't know. So I think that is a very real possibility. I think that if he can get sanction relief and a good deal on Ukraine, he would definitely take it. Question: is Bibi getting replaced due to optics? It looks like a lot of his government is leaving him, abandoning him. But again, I don't know enough about Israeli internal politics to give a real clear opinion on this. I'll answer general Israel questions, but I don't spend as much time listening and paying attention to that. So I'm not sure if he's going to be replaced. Beyond saving Russian lives, what is the benefit of Russia moving slowly, not using more of its advanced weapons, not taking out Zelensky? Well, not taking out Zelensky is exactly the right move, in my personal opinion. First off, he is not overly liked anymore in the West, so he is already creating issues between the West and himself. You can see that Trump does not particularly like Zelensky, so taking out Zelensky, I've always said is never the good answer. The devil, the devil who's keeping his troops in massive encirclements is much better than the politician or whoever replaces him who might be doing something more beneficial for Ukraine from a Russian perspective, right? Beyond saving lives, what is the benefit of Russia moving slow? One thing that I talk about is I think that this is already an agreed upon plan of attack. The Russians know what they're doing. They've done the mathematics on the situation. They know that they can win the war like this. So they're going to move slow and move at a continuous pace, right? Not a snail's pace, just a continuous pace. And you can see that it's accelerating, and it's just accelerating as the Ukrainians are getting weaker and weaker. The Russians are getting stronger, but I don't think that the battle plan has changed much. So people are always like, oh, why don't we see a big arrow? Like Putin's afraid of big arrow offensives, this, that, and the other. I just think that first off, Putin doesn't make those decisions. Second off, I just think that the military has decided that this is the way that they are going to win the war. And if you deviate from that plan in hopes that you can achieve a breakthrough or something, you could sacrifice the overall plan, right? You're winning. You're going to continue to win. Why not just keep that formula? Why fix something that isn't broken is basically what I'm saying. And on the backside of that, you are attriting a smaller army, attriting a Western support base that is not really prepared to go all in on Ukraine, and continuing to win the war. I mean, moving slowly is not really a bad thing unless you're impatient. That's why does it matter? If it's 2025, 2026, what does it matter when it ends? It's just perspective. Scott, you are doing a great job. Agree to disagree, but I appreciate you being here, Chris, guys. You're awesome. Only Russia and U.S. matter in negotiations. Do you agree? No. I think that this impacts Ukraine and the EU much, much, much more heavily than it impacts the U.S. I mean, it impacts Russia very heavily, but than the U.S. I think that the U.S. is the main backer and propagator of this whole thing. So I think that what you're saying, I do agree with that the best way to accomplish a negotiation is by not involving Ukraine in the EU. But as I've said, that's a crazy position because they're the ones most affected by it. How prepared is America to fight a new type of warfare like the Russo-Ukrainian conflict? Not very, with hypersonic missiles and drone warfare. Not super. We're developing our drones. It's getting better, but we are far behind where we should be in this line of warfare. Our Air Force is very strong. Our deep strike capabilities are very strong. Really, any enemy we choose to go against, if they're isolated, we can destroy. But in terms of fighting a large scale war like this, I mean, things change really quick with casus belli and events that trigger national outrage and unity and a lot can change in a very short amount of time. But currently speaking, I would say we are underprepared for that sort of war. Good question. Okay, going all the way down to the bottom. Holy Christ. Okay. All right, Name. You said that negotiations can't happen. Positions are wide. Oh, no, that's the same thing you've just said. I'm not. Read both comments together. I can't even find them. So, do you think Russia will annex the Odessa Oblast to secure the Black Sea? I think if this war goes long enough, yes. Oh, it's not wasting time. No, see, here's the thing is people that are not as educated on the topic are asking questions that people will generally ask. So when I pick a comment, I'm doing it very intentionally. Sometimes I see one that's a little trolly and I just want to make fun of it. But when I'm talking about this person, they're presenting a real argument that you will see on Twitter and stuff like that. And I'm just there to kind of pick it apart and explain why that doesn't make sense and what needs to be evaluated and inspected about a certain topic or anything like that. So I don't think it's a complete waste of time. I will say that sometimes it is a waste of time, but I think that it has its place. I'm not angry. I just don't have money for super chats. You're fine, brother. You can just ask a question. You do stand out. Your name is Name, but there is no. I don't see other comments to read together. So, oh wait. I already answered that one. Oh, man. All right, I'm getting back down to the bottom. You've switched again. How does Ukraine and the EU matter if they have no military muscle? What do you mean? I'm not. You are so confused about what I'm talking about. The EU and the Ukraine matter in the negotiations because they are affected by it just by their geography being right. Like Poland is more affected by the negotiations in the war than the US is. So I don't believe it's necessarily right for the US and Russia to make decisions on Ukraine and Europe's future without consulting them. Not that they have a military or anything like that, bro. That's stupid. That's not what I'm talking about. Do I think? Let's see. I'll do a couple more and then I'm going to wrap this up. Once the front line has completely broken and Russia can gain territory similar to 2022, what would Ukraine's last-ditch effort be in that situation? Fall back to the river and set up a defensive line, and then pray to God that NATO comes in and saves your ass. What are your thoughts on Trump getting cozy with OpenAI and Oracle and the $50 billion towards his policy? I think that this is the natural progression of technology. AI is the next arms race. Whoever has the most advanced AI operating at the highest level is going to have a exponential edge forever on all of their competitors. So the AI race is huge. And I also believe that this is a good way that the US could potentially bankrupt foreign nations by over-investing in these programs, unlike other nations can, like we saw with Star Wars and the Soviet Union and their space program. Potentially. How can Western Ukraine repopulate itself and function after the war? It won't. It won't repopulate. It wasn't repopulating before the war when things were okay. It's not going to repopulate after. They've lost a considerable amount of men. They've lost even more people just to fleeing to Russia and Europe. So, yeah, there's not really a good demographic situation for Ukraine. Ukraine's demographics will improve when a new group of people basically move in and inherit that land. Unless there's some massive cultural shift in Ukraine and people start having babies. Do you think Trump gave Israel the green light to bomb Iranian nuclear sites? No, I don't think that Trump is particularly hell-bent on bombing Iran. I think that it is definitely on the docket, but I don't think it's primary list. Africa was affected by the increased cost of wheat. Does that give Africa a voice in negotiations? No. Are you mad that Ukraine and I'm saying Ukraine and Europe might be part of a negotiation? And no, that does not mean that Africa gets a part in the negotiations. Their food deals that they get are completely separate. If the war interrupts that, it's just they're cut off from that. They don't have a say in the war because of that. Ukraine is the country where the war is being fought. Europe is the country where the war is being fought, or the continent where the war is being fought. The U.S. is not. Right? The U.S. is just funding and supplying everything, and then Russia is actively engaged in the war. Those are the parties that should have a say in what happens. How am I dick riding Putin, Jimmy? Again, all you talk about is penises. All you guys talk about. It's unbelievable. Trump has this incredible once in a century kind of mandate, and yet he's afraid to come out and say this war is not in our interest, and because it is now. It is in our interest. He can't come out and say things that aren't true. The war is not in our interests, but geostrategically, for the United States, in the position that we have put ourselves in, as we are now battling for our hegemony or nothing, basically, this is now important, right? If Russia becomes much stronger off of this, it generally weakens the U.S. position. It matters. No, I'm not going to go back and read your comment. I've actually answered your comment a number of times, and you are just completely missing my point time and time again. So you go back and rewatch the 43 minutes that I've spent answering questions and talking directly to you, and you might understand my point, but I'm not going to keep repeating it. All right, everybody. I love you so much. Thank you so much for being in here. I will see you on the next one, probably Friday or Saturday. So be on the lookout for that. I appreciate you all, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, guys.